My dear Wormwood, yes, a period of sexual temptation is an excellent time for working in a subordinate attack on the patient's peevishness. It may even be the main attack, as long as he thinks it the subordinate one. But here, as in everything else, the way must be prepared for your moral assault by darkening his intellect. Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury. And the sense of injury depends on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. The more claims on life, therefore, that your patient can be induced to make, the more often he will feel injured and, as a result, ill-tempered. Now, you will have noticed that nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find a tract of time which he reckoned on having at his own disposal unexpectedly taken from him. It is the unexpected visitor when he looked forward to a quiet evening, or the friend's talkative wife turning up when he looked forward to a tete-a-tete with the friend, that throw him out of gear. Now he is not yet so uncharitable or slothful that these small demands on his courtesy are in themselves too much for it. They anger him because he regards his time as his own and feels that it is being stolen. You must therefore zealously guard in his mind the curious assumption, my time is my own. Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours. Let him feel as a grievous tax that portion of this property which he has to make over to his employers, and as a generous donation that further portion which he allows to religious duties. But what he must never be permitted to doubt is that the total from which these deductions have been made was, in some mysterious sense, his own personal birthright. You have here a delicate task. The assumption which you want him to go on making is so absurd that if once it is questioned, even we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes to him by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon as his chattels. He is also, in theory, committed to a total service of the enemy. And if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, he would not refuse. He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman. And he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if for 1/2 hour in that day the enemy said, now you may go and amuse yourself. Now, if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. When I speak of preserving this assumption in his mind, therefore, the last thing I mean you to do is to furnish him with arguments in its defense. There aren't any. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near it. Wrap a darkness about it, and in the center of that darkness, let his sense of ownership in time lie silent, uninspected, and operative. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership, which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. Much of the modern resistance to chastit comes from men's belief that they own their bodies, those vast and perilous estates, pulsating with the energy that made the worlds in which they find themselves without their consent, and from which they are ejected at the pleasure of another. It is as if a royal child whom his father has placed, for love's sake, in titular command of some great province, under the real rule of wise counselors, should come to fancy he really owns the cities, the forests, and the corn, in the same way as he owns the bricks on the nursery floor. We produce this sense of ownership not only by pride, but by confusion. We teach them not to notice the different senses of the possessive pronoun, the finely graded differences that run from my boots, through my dog, my servant, my wife, my father, my master, and my country, to my God. They can be taught to reduce all these senses to that of my boots, the my of ownership. Even in the nursery, a child can be taught to mean by my teddy bear, not the old imagined recipient of affection, to whom it stands in a special relation, for that is what the enemy will teach them to mean if we are not careful. But the bear I can pull to pieces if I like. And at the other end of the scale, we have taught men to say, my God, in a sense not really very different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have a claim for my distinguished services and whom I exploit from the pulpit, the God I have done a corner in. And all the time the joke is that the word mine, in its fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our father or the enemy will say mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong, certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. Your affectionate uncle. My dear Wormwood, so your man is in love, and in the worst kind he could possibly have fallen into, and with a girl who does not even appear in the report you sent me. You may be interested to learn that the little misunderstanding with the secret police, which you tried to raise about some unguarded expressions in one of my letters, has been tided over. If you are reckoning on that to secure my good offices, you will find yourself mistaken. You shall pay for that as well as for your other blunders. Meanwhile, I enclose a little booklet, just issued, on the new House of Correction for Incompetent Tempters. It is profusely illustrated, and you will not find a dull page in it. I have looked up this girl's dossier and am horrified at what I find. Not only a Christian, but such a Christian, a vile, sneaking, simpering, demure, monosyllabic, mouse-like, watery, insignificant, virginal bread-and-butter miss, the little brute. She makes me vomit. She stinks and scalds through the very pages of the dossier. It drives me mad, the way the world has worsened. We'd have had her to the arena in the old days. That's what her sort is made for. Not that she'd do much good there, either. A two-faced little cheat, I know the sort, who looks as if she'd faint at the sight of blood, and then dies with a smile. A cheat every way. Looks as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, and yet has a satirical wit. The sort of creature who'd find me funny, filthy, insipid little prude, and yet ready to fall into this booby's arms like any other breeding animal. Why doesn't the enemy blast her for it? If he's so moonstruck by virginity, instead of looking on there grinning, he's a hedonist at heart. All those fasts and vigils and stakes and crosses are only a facade, or only like foam on the seashore. Out at sea, out in his sea, there is pleasure, and more pleasure. He makes no secret of it. At his right hand are pleasures forevermore. Ugh! I don't think he has the least inkling of that high and austere mystery to which we rise in the miserific vision. He's vulgar, Wormwood. He has a bourgeois mind. He has filled his world full of pleasures. There are things for humans to do all day long without his minding in the least. Sleeping, washing, eating, drinking, making love, playing, praying, working. Everything has to be twisted before it's any use to us. We fight under cruel disadvantages. Nothing is naturally on our side. Not that that excuses you. I'll settle with you presently. You have always hated me and been insolent when you dared. Then, of course, he gets to know this woman's family and whole circle. Could you not see that the very house she lives in is one that he ought never to have entered? The whole place reeks of that deadly odor. The very gardener, though he has only been there 5 years, is beginning to acquire it. Even guests, after a weekend visit, carry some of the smell away with them. The dog and the cat are tainted with it, and a house full of the impenetrable mystery. We are certain it is a matter of first principles that each member of the family must in some way be making capital out of the others. But we can't find out how. They guard as jealously as the enemy himself the secret of what really lies behind this pretense of disinterested love. The whole house and garden is one vast obscenity. It bears a sickening resemblance to the description one human writer made of heaven. The regions where there is only life, and therefore all that is not music is silent. Music and silence, how I detest them both. How thankful we should be that ever since our Father entered hell, though longer ago than humans, reckoning in light years could express, no square inch of infernal space, and no moment of infernal time has been surrendered to either of those abominable forces. But all has been occupied by noise, the grand dynamism, the audible expression of all that is exultant, ruthless, and virile. Noise which alone defends us from silly qualms, despairing scruples, and impossible desires. We will make the whole universe a noise in the end. We have already made great strides in this direction as regards the earth. The melodies and silences of heaven will be shouted down in the end. But I admit we are not yet loud enough or anything like it. Research is in progress. Meanwhile, you, discussed in little... In the heat of composition, I find that I have inadvertently allowed myself to assume the form of a large centipede. I am accordingly dictating the rest to my secretary. Now that the transformation is complete, I recognize it as a periodical phenomenon. Some rumor of it has reached the humans, and a distorted account of it appears in the poet Milton, with the ridiculous addition that such changes of shape are a punishment imposed on us by the enemy. A more modern writer, someone with a name like Shaw, has, however, grasped the truth. Transformation proceeds from within and is a glorious manifestation of that life force which our Father would worship if he worshipped anything but himself. In my present form, I feel even more anxious to see you, to unite you to myself in an indissoluble embrace. Signed, Toadpipe. For his abysmal sublimity, under Secretary Screwtape, T.E., B.S., etc. My dear Wormwood, through this girl and her disgusting family, the patient is now getting to know more Christians every day, and very intelligent Christians too. For a long time, it will be quite impossible to remove spirituality from his life. Very well then, we must corrupt it. No doubt you have often practiced transforming yourself into an angel of light as a parade ground exercise. Now is the time to do it in the face of the enemy. The world and the flesh have failed us. A third power remains, and success of this third kind is the most glorious of all. A spoiled saint, a Pharisee, an inquisitor, or a magician makes better sport in hell than a mere common tyrant or debauch. Looking round your patient's new friends, I find that the best point of attack would be the borderline between theology and politics. Several of his new friends are very much alive to the social implications of their religion. That in itself is a bad thing, but good can be made out of it. You will find that a good many Christian political writers think that Christianity began going wrong and departing from the doctrine of its founder at a very early stage. Now, this idea must be used by us to encourage, once again, the conception of a historical Jesus, to be found by clearing away later accretions and perversions, and then to be contrasted with the whole Christian tradition. In the last generation, we promoted the construction of such a historical Jesus on liberal and humanitarian lines. We are now putting forward a new historical Jesus on Marxian, catastrophic, and revolutionary lines. The advantages of these constructions, which we intend to change every 30 years or so, are manifold. In the first place, they all tend to direct men's devotion to something which does not exist. For each historical Jesus is unhistorical. The documents say what they say and cannot be added to. Each new historical Jesus, therefore, has to be got out of them by suppression at one point and exaggeration at another, and by this sort of guessing. Brilliant is the adjective we teach humans to apply to it, on which no one would risk 10 shillings in ordinary life, but which is enough to produce a crop of new Napoleons, new Shakespeares, and new Swifts in every publisher's autumn list. In the second place, all such constructions place the importance of their historical Jesus in some peculiar theory he is supposed to have promulgated. He has to be a great man in the modern sense of the word, one standing at the terminus of some centrifugal and imbalanced line of thought, a crank vending a panacea. We thus distract men's minds from who he is and what he did. We first make him solely a teacher, and then conceal the very substantial agreement between his teachings and those of all other great moral teachers. For humans must not be allowed to notice that all great moralists are sent by the enemy not to inform men, but to remind them, to restate the primeval moral platitudes against our continual concealment of them. We make the sophists. He raises up a Socrates to answer them. Our third aim is, by these constructions, to destroy the devotional life. For the real presence of the enemy, otherwise experienced by men in prayer and sacrament, we substitute a merely probable, remote, shadowy, and uncouth figure, one who spoke a strange language and died a long time ago. Such an object cannot in fact be worshipped. Instead of the Creator adored by its creature, you soon have merely a leader acclaimed by a partisan, and finally, a distinguished character approved by a judicious historian. And fourthly, besides being unhistorical in the Jesus it depicts, religion of this kind is false to history, in another sense. No nation and few individuals are really brought into the enemy's camp by the historical study of the biography of Jesus, simply as biography. Indeed, materials for a full biography have been withheld from men. The earliest converts were converted by a single historical fact, the resurrection, and a single theological doctrine, the redemption, operating on a sense of sin which they already had, and sin not against some new fancy-dressed law produced as a novelty by a great man, but against the old platitudinous universal moral law which they had been taught by their nurses and mothers. The Gospels come later and were written not to make Christians, but to edify Christians already made. The historical Jesus, then, however dangerous he may seem to be to us at some particular point, is always to be encouraged. About the general connection between Christianity and politics, our position is more delicate. Certainly, we do not want men to allow their Christianity to flow over into their political life, for the establishment of anything like a really just society would be a major disaster. On the other hand, we do want, and want very much, to make men treat Christianity as a means, preferably, of course, as a means to their own advancement, but failing that, as a means to anything, even to social justice. The thing to do is to get a man at first to value social justice as a thing which the enemy demands, and then work him on to the stage at which he values Christianity because it may produce social justice. For the enemy will not be used as a convenience. Men or nations who think they can revive the faith in order to make a good society might just as well think they can use the stairs of heaven as a shortcut to the nearest chemist's shop. Fortunately, it is quite easy to coax humans round this little corner. Only today I have found a passage in a Christian writer where he recommends his own version of Christianity on the ground that only such a faith can outlast the death of old cultures and the birth of new civilizations. You see the little rift? Believe this, not because it is true, but for some other reason. That's the game, your affectionate uncle. My dear Wormwood, I have been in correspondence with Slum Trimpet, who is in charge of your patient's young woman, and begin to see the chink in her armor. It is an unobtrusive little vice, which she shares with nearly all women who have grown up in an intelligent circle, united by a clearly defined belief. And it consists in a quite untroubled assumption that the outsiders who do not share this belief are really too stupid and ridiculous. The males who habitually meet these outsiders do not feel that way. Their confidence, if they are confident, is of a different kind. Hers, which she supposes to be due to faith, is in reality largely due to the mere color she has taken from her surroundings. It is not, in fact, very different from the conviction she would have felt at the age of 10 that the kind of fish knives used in her father's house were the proper or normal or real kind, while those of the neighboring families were not real fish knives at all. Now, the element of ignorance and naivety in all this is so large, and the element of spiritual pride so small, that it gives us little hope of the girl herself. But have you thought of how it can be made to influence your own patient? It is always the novice who exaggerates. The man who has risen in society is over-refined. The young scholar is pedantic. In this new circle, your patient is a novice. He is there daily meeting Christian life of equality. He never before imagined and seeing it all through an enchanted glass because he is in love. He is anxious, indeed the enemy commands him, to imitate this quality. can you get him to imitate this defect in his mistress and to exaggerate it until what was venial in her becomes in him the strongest and most beautiful of the vices, spiritual pride. The conditions seem ideally favorable. The new circle in which he finds himself is one of which he is tempted to be proud for many reasons other than its Christianity. It is a better educated, more intelligent, more agreeable society than any he has yet encountered. He is also under some degree of illusion as to his own place in it. Under the influence of love, he may still think himself unworthy of the girl, but he is rapidly ceasing to think himself unworthy of the others. He has no notion how much in him is forgiven, because they are charitable and made the best of, because he is now one of the family. He does not dream how much of his conversation, how many of his opinions are recognized by them all as mere echoes of their own. Still less does he suspect how much of the delight he takes in these people is due to the erotic enchantment which the girl, for him, spreads over all her surroundings. He thinks that he likes their talk and way of life because of some congruity between their spiritual state and his, when in fact they are so far beyond him that if he were not in love, he would be merely puzzled and repelled by much which he now accepts. He is like a dog, which should imagine it understood firearms because its hunting instinct and love for its master enable it to enjoy a day's shooting. Here is your chance. While the enemy, by means of sexual love and of some very agreeable people far advanced in his service, is drawing the young barbarian up to levels he could never otherwise have reached, you must make him feel that he is finding his own level, that these people are his sort, and that coming among them he has come home. When he turns from them to other society, he will find it dull, partly because almost any society within his reach is, in fact, much less entertaining, but still more because he will miss the enchantment of the young woman. You must teach him to mistake this contrast between the secret that dilates and the circle that bores him for the contrast between Christians and unbelievers. He must be made to feel, he'd better not put it into words, how different we Christians are. And by we Christians, he must really, but unknowingly, mean my set. And by my set, he must mean not the people who, in their charity and humility, have accepted me, but the people with whom I associate by right. Success here depends on confusing him. If you try to make him explicitly and professedly proud of being a Christian, you will probably fail. The enemy's warnings are too well known. If, on the other hand, you let the idea of we Christians drop out altogether and merely make him complacent about his set, you will produce not true spiritual pride, but mere social vanity, which, by comparison, is a trumpery, puny little sin. What you want is to keep a sly self-congratulation mixing with all his thoughts and never allow him to raise the question, what precisely am I congratulating myself about? The idea of belonging to an inner ring, of being in a secret, is very sweet to him. Play on that nerve. Teach him, using the influence of this girl when she's silliest, to adopt an air of amusement at the things the unbelievers say. Some theories, which he may meet in modern Christian circles, may here prove helpful. Theories, I mean, that place the hope of society in some inner ring of clerks, some trained minority of theocrats. It is no affair of yours whether those theories are true or false. The great thing is to make Christianity a mystery religion in which he feels himself one of the initiates. Pray do not fill your letters with rubbish about this European war. Its final issue is, no doubt, important, but that is a matter for the High Command. I am not in the least interested in knowing how many people in England have been killed by bombs. In what state of mind they died, I can learn from the office at this end. That they were going to die sometime, I knew already. Please keep your mind on your work, your affectionate uncle.
Prayer is one of the most powerful weapons Christians possess. If only believers truly understood the amount of power that emanates from the presence of God when they pray, they would never treat prayer lightly even once. In the Screwtape Letters, it says, "The prayer itself is an unbreakable fortress. The attempt to lift the mind beyond the merely human, even briefly, is something we cannot allow. A distracted prayer is a good start to the ruin of a Christian." However, many Christians never take prayer seriously. Now I want you to listen carefully, because I am going to explain something that happens in the spiritual realm when you pray. You see, there are two dimensions of prayer, and only one is effective. There is the earthly and there is the heavenly. You see, when God created man in the beginning, as it says in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 26, he gave man dominion over all the earth. God delegated his divine authority to humanity, giving us the supernatural ability to rule and reign over the world. But for man to exercise this God-given dominion over the earth correctly, he must operate from a higher realm, not just the natural realm. And for you to have access to this higher spiritual realm from which you can govern or solve your problems, you will have to pray and operate from a higher realm that can only be found in the very presence of God. In John chapter 3, verse 31, it is written, "He who comes from above is above all." This also means that when you are in the presence of God, which is much higher than the earthly domain, you will be above all your problems, difficulties, or issues that the earthly realm throws at you. In the Screwtape Letters, it says, "Whenever they are inclined to pray, we must be active. This is where we can intervene and distract them, diverting their attention to their own concerns, and thus away from true prayer. And when we get distracted, the first way of praying happens, which is how most people pray, what I call praying in the flesh. It is when a person is actively praying, but their heart and mind keep wandering. They are praying, but at the same time, they are spiritually distracted from the presence of God because their minds keep wandering. As a result, their spirit never truly gains access to the manifest presence of God. This kind of person may go to church for years and pray, but will continue to return home exactly the same way they left. Lewis speaks that group prayer is more difficult because it is easier to pretend or go with the flow. True prayer is, in effect, renouncing our own will and giving ourselves over to God's will. He says this in his book, Mere Christianity, and what they don't realize is that their prayers have no effect in the spiritual realm because they are praying in the flesh. That is why you may sometimes be in a prayer meeting and find someone falling asleep while the prayer is happening. In the Screwtape Letters, it also says, their minds are always drifting away from the object of prayer to focus on themselves and their own efforts to pray. Do you realize that focusing solely on oneself is harmful? That's why Lewis says, "The essential vice, the utmost evil, is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind." He says this in his book, Mere Christianity. So getting distracted from prayer to think about your own problems is like giving more importance to yourself than to this moment of connection with the divine. This type of person does not truly understand what it means to be in the presence of God. They treat spiritual matters casually, and because they are not connected to the Spirit of God at that moment, the flesh takes over. So instead of praying fervently, the mind and flesh begin to dominate the spirit. They tend to fall asleep only when the sermon is happening or when prayers are being said. This person falls asleep during prayers but stays awake if they are on their phone. In most cases, the devil will always make you feel heavier to pray when God is about to do something in your life. This person might wake up in the morning, but instead of equipping themselves as soldiers of God and praying, they prefer to lie in bed to pray, and before they know it, they start to fall asleep. To them, they think they are praying, but to God, they are not praying. The reason they are lying down is to keep themselves in a comfortable state. In Mere Christianity, Lewis says, "The presence of God is the hardest reality to remember and the easiest to forget during prayer. Our mind is inclined to wander and be distracted by what is tangible and immediate. They feel too lazy to get up. That's why such prayers have little or no effect. When it comes to the things of God, you cannot be lukewarm. You must choose to be alert or choose to be inactive." In Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 to 16, Jesus rebuked the church in Laodicea, saying, "I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth." In this passage, the Lord was rebuking the church in Laodicea for their spiritual complacency. Their deeds were neither fervently righteous nor weak. When Jesus says, "I wish you were either cold or hot," the term translated as cold is psychros, which means icy, cold, or fresh. Hot is thermos, meaning heated, boiling, or fervent. So Christ was essentially saying he preferred Christians to be strongly devoted to the things of God, or openly opposed to his ways, rather than being lukewarm, or a mixture of the two. Then there is the second class of prayer, which is what I call praying in the Spirit. This type of prayer is the only one that reaches the presence of God. It happens when a person is fully immersed and surrendered to the presence of God. In Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, Lewis says, "Prayer is a response to the presence of God in our lives. When we perceive this presence, even in the smallest things, we are truly praying. They are not distracted, thinking about what others are doing, or worried about their situations. They are simply enveloped by the presence of God. A believer who prays this way may be physically praying, but their body, soul, and spirit will be completely focused on God. If you want to be the kind of Christian who gets results from God, you must learn to completely surrender your spirit to the presence of God the moment you are praying. So you must actively position yourself to receive from God. This means you should not be distracted in mind, body, or spirit. The reason is that whenever a person is worshipping, their spirit will be where their mind is. For example, if while you are praying or worshipping, You keep imagining and thinking about the shopping you need to do later that day. Your spirit will not be in the presence of God, but rather in the shopping center. So although you think you are worshipping God in spirit and in truth, you are actually worshipping what your mind is focused on. Jesus said in Matthew 6, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Similarly, in Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7, it says, "For as he thinks in his heart, so is he." But when a true believer is worshipping God, he or she may be physically present here on earth, but their real spirit will be in the manifest presence of God in heaven. Although you see them right there beside you, such a true believer will be spiritually present before the throne of God. It is only at this stage that such a believer will begin to encounter the manifestations of God's presence, because he or she is not worshipping in the flesh. At this stage, this person will be able to present their cases before God, and they will be heard, because this is the type of prayer God truly wants. In the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verse 24, Jesus said, "God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the spirit and in truth." Note that Jesus did not simply say that we should worship him. He said it must be done in spirit and in truth. This means that if a person is praying or worshipping, and their mind is wandering, or they are distracted, this type of worship is not in truth, and if you continue to pray to God in this manner, you will never get results. In fact, your earthly problems will hardly respond to your prayers, because for nature to obey the voice of a man, such a man must be speaking or praying from a place of authority. So when you pray in the flesh, your prayers will be earthly and powerless. But when you pray in the Spirit, your spirit will be transported to the heavenly realm. And because you are seated far above all principalities and powers, you are able to address these situations, and they will bow to your voice because you are speaking from the very presence of God. True prayer transports you directly into the manifest presence of Almighty God. It lifts our spirits to the heavenly places, where we are seated with Christ far above all powers and authorities. As it says in the book of Ephesians chapter 2, verse 6. So when your physical body kneels to pray on this earth, your spirit is immediately conducted into the very throne room of God. You are instantly elevated above your circumstances, above your enemies, and above any opposition or demonic principality. As it says in the book of Ephesians, chapter 1, verse 21, Christ reigns far above every other government, authority, power, and dominion. And when you enter the presence of God through prayer, you share in this supreme authority of Christ. Therefore, prayer is not just talking to God. It is being transported to another dimension. It is accessing supernatural resources and heavenly realms. Lewis says, prayer is not a magic trick, but rather a direct connection to the divine essence. It is where the realms of heaven and earth meet, and where the authority of the Almighty is manifested through our words. He says this in his book, Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer. That is why we are exhorted in the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 18, to always pray with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit. You are accessing the authority and power of the Holy Spirit when you pray. Therefore, when you pray, you must see it as much more than asking God for some trivial things. You are entering the control room of the universe. Do not take this lightly. Approach God with reverence, as the 24 elders do in the book of Revelation, chapter 4, verse 10. Understand the importance of prayer. Now, when you begin to pray from this higher spiritual realm, everything you are addressing on earth must obey your voice. Because you are operating from above, you have authority over everything below. As it says in the book of John, chapter 3, verse 31. He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth belongs to the earth, and speaks in an earthly way. He who comes from heaven is above all. Therefore, when you pray, you are speaking from heaven itself, where you are positionally seated with Christ. Lewis says, prayer is one of the means by which God invites us to participate in his divine work. It takes us to a level of communion, where his authority and power are reflected through us. He says this in his book, Mere Christianity. Thus your voice carries the authority and command of heaven. That is why you must never allow yourself to be distracted when praying. Protect your prayer time with vigilance, because it is an incredibly serious and solemn moment when you gain direct access to the power and supremacy of heaven. The enemy will try everything to interrupt your prayers because he knows what is at stake in the spiritual realm when you pray. Your focused prayers dismantle his operations and undermine his influence. As James 5:16 says, the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. So pray with focus, purity, and faith, not allowing the worries of this world to divert your mind from the spiritual realm. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith, as it says in Hebrews. Allow the Holy Spirit to intercede for you, praying for God's perfect will to manifest on earth. You have no idea what God can and will do through your prayers. This is not a tedious religious ritual, but an awe-inspiring adventure, where the omnipotent and miraculous power of the Almighty is accessible to you, because when you become a Christian, your spirit is instantly united with the Spirit of Christ. In letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, it says, prayer, in a sense, is not a request. It is the union of the soul with God and the seeking of his will. True prayer is an exchange of intentions, where we surrender our concerns and desires and receive the peace that only God can give. So you become one with him, as 1 Corinthians 6:17 says, but whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. Therefore, when you pray, your prayers are not merely your words. Your prayers are the words of Christ. The very authority and power of Christ flow through your prayer voice. You are an ambassador through whom the King of Kings speaks. You are a conduit through which the Lion of Judah roars. Your prayers on earth summon the forces of heaven. That is why Jesus said in John, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. When you are united in spirit with Christ through salvation, his words remain in you. Therefore, you can pray his will and see it come to pass. Moreover, when you pray, Jesus Christ himself is interceding on your behalf. Romans 8:34 says, Christ Jesus who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. So the risen Jesus Christ, the eternal King, is pleading your case before the Father's throne as you pray. You also have the Holy Spirit interceding for you. As Romans 8:26-27 explains, we do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans, and he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. So in essence, when you pray, you are exercising the authoritative words of Christ that remain in you. You are releasing his power through your prayers. You have Christ himself interceding for you. That's it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy our videos, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel.